On the second Sunday of each month, we have what we call Ohana Share, which is a chance to hear from one of our church members, a little bit of their story, a little bit of their testimony. And Mandy Walters has graciously agreed. Every time someone agrees to this, I know it's a risk, because how many of us don't exactly love speaking in front of groups of people at church? Yes. But this is special because sometimes we hear from people right when they're coming or maybe new to our church. But this is different because this is Ramey and Mandy's last Sunday with us before moving to the Washington, D.C. area. And so I'm very grateful for their presence in our church and want to invite Mandy to just come and share a little bit with us this morning.
Okay, well, I'm excited to share with you guys what a joy it's been a part of this church for the last 2 years. We moved here from Georgia, and we visited about 5 or 6 churches before coming to KUMC, which we have never been to a Methodist church. So when I came in, we were just really drawn to several things. We felt the message Pastor Tim was giving was just very down to earth, and we really liked that. And I noticed there was a need for like childcare at one of the women's Bible studies, and I've done children's like ministry for over 10 years in our churches, and so I remember like wanting to like reach out to Cindy was the contact for that. So our very first time coming, I'm halfway out of the parking lot, we're getting ready to leave, and Cindy runs after me, and I had no idea, this is the pastor's wife coming after me to introduce herself and be a part of. So that was just really awesome. And so the very next week, Wednesday, I went over to Tori Waffin's house, visited the Bible study, and I was just hooked. I loved the fellowship with the ladies outside of the church. I've had the privilege of going to 3 different ones, our mom's group, the women's Bible study, and then the Seekers was a lot of fun. I got to go one evening. So I really have appreciated the authenticity of everyone in the study outside of fellowship with the church, and just everyone's just really genuine here, and I love seeing the outreach that KUMC does within the community. So that's just been really great for me in growing in my walk and since I've been a member of KUMC. So I'm really going to miss it. So, yeah. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you, Mandy. We'll have a chance later on to pray for the Walters, as well as Rick Rohr, who's has a new assignment in Sicily and is heading out for that. But we'll share more at the end of our worship service. So we're in a brief, just a 3-week series called Summertime, in which we're looking at how some of the activities associated with summer are activities that feed our soul, that nourish our soul, that are really important for our soul. And I want to begin this morning by asking you to reflect on this question: what is home and where is home? Think about that for a second. What is home and where is home? Now, there's no one right answer to that. My guess is that our answers to that question would vary greatly. But I want us to think about home this morning. And here's why. As I was preparing for this series, thinking about summertime, I was struck by the fact that summertime is a time when many of us head home. When we travel back to see our family or our hometown. Now, that may mean driving down the street and going to a family reunion. There's a lot of family reunions over summer, right? Or it may mean even longer travel. I know for Cindy and I, we have a pattern where one summer we visit my family, my home, where I grew up in Washington State, and then the next summer we switch and we go to Chicago or Minnesota and we visit where Cindy grew up, we visit her family. Now this year is a Rowe family summer, but we're not going to Chicago or Minnesota. Instead, this afternoon, in a few hours, we're hopping on a plane and going to Korea. So this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime trip for our family. 44 years ago, Cindy's family left their home left their homeland, left their family, and they immigrated to America. And as a family, they've never been back. Cindy and I have been back once in 2001, and her mom joined us. Her mom had never been back since immigrating. Both of her parents had died, and she had not been able to go back on either occasion. So it was the first time seeing their graves and seeing where they were buried. Her dad has never been back. Her brother's never been back. 44 years. Our kids have never been there. Now, unfortunately, her father, after planning to go, is now not going. It just does not want to travel that far from Chicago. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip in many ways for our kids, for them as Koreans to see a home in a way that they've never seen, to connect to that part of their culture, to connect to that part of their identity. And I know just from talking to folks that many of you make trips over the summer. I know Michelle Labree's gone for 2 months seeing family. I know we've had trips go to Ohio and to Pennsylvania, to Florida, even to Canada. That's right. Shout out to the Petranics. Where's Arlene? All right, we like to support our Canadians in this church. So, folks travel to see family, and that means for others, folks traveling back to Hawaii, right? Ken Heflin is a former pastor, beloved former pastor of our church. His son contacted me a couple months ago and said, I'm bringing the family to Hawaii. They live in Orange County in California. He said, I want to show my sons the parsonage because it's the house I grew up in. I said, bring him by. It turns out he's coming to Hawaii to be part of his high school 40th reunion. There's something about summertime in which we head home. And I think this tradition of homecomings during the summer reveals something significant about us as human beings. We long for home. Even if we can't define what it means, we long for home. Even if it's a home we've never experienced, we long for home. We see this longing in so many movies, right? The theme of homecoming, coming home. So many books, so many songs. You know, right away I think of John Denver's classic, Take Me Home, Country Roads, to the place I belong. Now, that's just one of so many songs. Just a few days ago, I was driving in my car. I turned on the radio, and the song being played was a song called Home by Chris Tomlin. It goes like this: this world is not what it was meant to be. All this pain, all this suffering, there's a better place waiting for me in heaven. Every tear will be wiped away, every sorrow and sin erased. We'll dance on seas of amazing grace in heaven. I'm going home where the streets are golden, every chain is broken. Oh, I want to go home where every fear is gone. I'm in your open arms where I belong. Home. What is home and where is home for you? Now, personally, this longing for home has always really resonated with me. It speaks to my heart right away. I don't have to have it explained. It's this desire for home. It's like, I get that. It's funny because two Saturdays ago, last weekend, we had our One Big Canoe, our Saturday night worship service at Kailua, United Methodist Church. And I was talking to one of the women there, and I'd say she was probably in her 70s. And I said, oh, did you grow up here? And she said, I live in the house I grew up in. Now, as a 70-year-old, I can't imagine living in the house I grew up in. I've lived in Washington, Tennessee, California, Pennsylvania, Hawaii. My dad was a United Methodist pastor. I moved around a lot. And when I look at our church, my guess is that there's a real mix here of how people view and understand home and experience home. Because I know there are many in our church who have been here a long time, and this is clearly, this community is their home, this place is their home. And my guess is that there are others here this morning who are missing home, who are looking to find a home, looking to find a place of belonging. Do any of you watch Hawaii Five-0? All right. So I do not watch it very much any longer. I know there's been some pay disputes with some of the actors. But when my first year here, I watched it a lot. I watched it every week. And I enjoyed watching it because you'd see places, right? And you're like, oh, that's what that place is. It's not called that. It's that place, right? And, I just enjoyed it. But one of the things I noticed over time, because I don't know what it's like now. I think the plot's gotten crazy. But when my first year of watching it, it was a very formulaic plot. There was some crime, some police issue that needed to be resolved. So there was a lot of action, right? Crazy action with the cute guy from Australia. What's his name? Steve, and his partner Danny, right? And but the end would always be this ohana hanging out together. Steve, Danny, Chinho, Kono, the rest, right? It would always be a scene of them at a restaurant in Waikiki, or a scene of them in one of their homes, and they would be eating together and laughing together and just enjoying this sense of ohana together, this diverse group of people. And one day I realized, I think I watched this show because I'm drawn to the ohana they have. I'm drawn to that sense of home, that sense of belonging that they have together. That's what really appeals to me in watching this TV show. And I think from a spiritual standpoint, there is something truly significant about our longing for home. It points us to the fact that our soul needs a home. It points us to something deeper. From a spiritual standpoint, we were given this desire to belong. And that desire points us ultimately to God. And in many ways, if you think about the Bible, because the Bible is such a unique Christian or religious literature. Of all religions and faiths, the Bible starts at the beginning and ends at the end. That is unique. You don't find that in any other faith tradition. This story that starts literally at the beginning and ends at the end. And in some ways, this story is one big story of homecoming. It's a story of how we as human beings have wandered from our home and how God has reached out to bring us back to our home with Him. And this story begins in Genesis, where God creates a home for people to be with Him. And that home is called the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is paradise. It is paradise, full of fruit and trees and flowers and animals. And Eden is the perfect home for this perfect home that God has created for human beings to be with each other, to be with nature, and to be with God. And describing life in Eden, Genesis 3 has this really interesting phrase. It says that Adam and Eve heard the sound of the Lord God as He was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Isn't that weird? God is spirit. God does not have legs, feet, arms. So what does it sound like when God walks in a garden? And there's nowhere else in the Bible where we get this kind of intimate physical description of God dwelling, being in a place like that. And as John Ortberg suggests, the reason for this phrase is to point out that walking is something that you do with somebody you care about. Right? A friend with a friend, a lover with a lover, a parent with a child. It's not about the walking, it's about being with someone. So right away in the Bible, we discover that God made us to be with Him. Our souls were made to walk with God. Our souls were made to be home with God. But Adam and Eve turn their back on God. They choose to go their own way. They sin. And as a result, when God shows up, they hide from God in the trees of the garden. And as a result of their disobedience, as a result of their declaration of independence, they are removed from the garden and end up living east of Eden. And that's where all of us find ourselves, east of Eden, away from the home with God that we were made for. And the rest of the Bible has one simple plot line: God doing everything God can to bring us back home. Now, in biblical terms, leaving home is called exile. And throughout the Bible, we see the theme of exile and homecoming, of people going away from home and then coming back home again. We see this pattern throughout the Old Testament with many leaders. We see it with Abraham and with Jacob and with Joseph. And when you think about the Exodus, God freeing his people from slavery in Egypt, that is in some ways a story of homecoming. God's people were in exile in Egypt for 400 years, and then God brings them to the home, to the land that God has promised them. And this pattern of exile and homecoming, it reaches a crescendo when Israel is divided into two nations, and both nations are conquered. The northern kingdom, as it's called, the northern kingdom of Israel is conquered by the Assyrians, and the southern kingdom of Judah is conquered by the Babylonians. The Babylonians come in, they wipe out Jerusalem, they destroy the temple, and then they take many of the people living there, and they force them to go and live in Babylon. They force them to live as strangers in a foreign land. They force them to live in exile. And you see some of the Psalms where they're weeping tears over this loss of their home. But then, once again, there's a homecoming. Because 70 years later, Babylon falls to Persia. And the Persian ruler allows the Israelites to go back home to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. So by the time that Jesus shows up, this theme of exile and homecoming is deeply ingrained in the hearts and minds of God's people. And it's not surprising then that Jesus' most famous story is the story of a son who says, "Dad, I want my inheritance now." And he gets it, and he leaves home. Bye, Dad. Bye, brother. He takes off to a foreign land where he squanders his money in loose living. Many of you know this story. But then he comes to his senses. He realizes, what am I doing here? The true life, the good life is with Dad. The true good life is home. And so he decides to head home, and while he's walking home with his prepared speech, his dad sees him coming, and he runs and greets him, throws his arms around him, throws a lei around his neck, gives him a hug, and says, "Welcome home." Our true home is with God. But like this son, we have wandered off from home. And the point of Jesus' ministry is to bring us back home to God where we belong. And Jesus seeks to do this not just for particular individuals or for one particular group, but to do this for the whole world. Jesus came to establish the kingdom of God, which means that Jesus came to restore what was lost in Eden, to restore the world to what it was originally designed to be. That's Jesus' ministry. That's our mission as a church. And in Revelation 21, this morning's scripture, we see a picture of what this restoration project will look like when it's complete. A picture of what our world will look like when God's kingdom comes in its entirety, when heaven and earth are finally one. And it's a beautiful picture. As Cindy read, it's a picture in which we hear that there will be no more death, no more crying, no more pain. And the amazing part of this promised future is that we will be with God fully and forever. As the voice from the throne cries out, "See, the home of God is among mortals. God will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them." The end of the Bible the Bible ends exactly where it begins, right? With God once again making his home with people. Our soul needs a home, and that home is with God. A few weeks ago, I asked if any of you have seen the movie Lion. Who's seen the movie Lion? Okay. It was nominated for an Oscar, Best Picture, and I highly recommend it, but spoiler alert, I'm going to ruin it for you and tell you what it's about right now. So just close your ears if you don't want to have that spoiler alert. But it's a movie from Australia, made, I think, in Australia, but it takes place in India and then in Australia. And if you wonder, why do we invest in India? Why do we send people, resources, support to what God is doing in India? Please see this movie. Just see what life is like for one child there. And you'll fully understand why we support what God is doing in India. But this movie is based on a true story, and it's about a boy. It's a 5-year-old boy, and he goes off with his brother. His brother works at night. He says, I want to come. No, you're too young. Finally, the brother says, okay. So they go to this train station. His brother says, you stay here, I'll be right back. And the boy falls asleep. When he wakes up, he doesn't see his brother, and he goes looking for him, shouting out his name. He hops on a train, thinking maybe he's on the train, and then the train takes off. It's a train that's out of service, and the train just keeps going. No one's on it, keeps going. A day passes. I think another day passes. He's still on the train. Finally, it stops in the middle of nowhere for this boy, but it stops in Calcutta. Now, it turns out, he doesn't know this, but the train has gone 1,600 kilometers, and I know we all know metric system really well, so that's a long ways. The train has gone 1,600 kilometers, and he shows up in this train station with all these people, and he starts just living on the streets in Calcutta. And no one knows the town that he says he's from. He's 5. He just wants to find his mom. He wants to find his brother. But no one knows where he's from, and no one can understand that we don't know that town. This is pre-technology, so he's living on the streets. Then he gets adopted by a family in Australia. And he grows up in Australia with a loving home. They adopt another boy from India as well, and he has more kind of troubles, and so there's some tension there. But he goes off to college. Very successful young man, goes off to Melbourne to college. But when he is in college, he can't let go of this sense of, where am I from? Right? My mom, my brother, where are they? Who am I? Right? It's this longing, not just for belonging, but a longing for identity. And he can't shake it. And he feels like he should, but he meets Indians and they ask him these questions, and this stirring just starts boiling up in him. And he starts thinking, well, I think I was on the train for 2 days, so trains at this year went this speed, and he does all these mathematical calculations to try to figure out how far he might have gone. And he has these images in his head of the train station and the water tower. He knows he will see, if he sees his hometown, he'll know, he'll recognize it. Time goes by, he still can't find it. And you just see his struggle, but then one day, Google Earth, it's all thanks to Google Earth. One day he realizes he had traveled a lot farther than he thought he had. And he looks and he sees a town, and he goes down, and he sees it. He recognizes it. He knows, that's the town I grew up in. So he hops on a plane, and he flies back to India. And he knows exactly where to go. He goes right to the trail between the houses to go to his house, and he walks in, and it's someone he doesn't know. But he mentions his mom's name, and the man says, come with me. And then there's this powerful scene of him standing there, and there's his mom. And we see them embracing. We see them hugging. We just see the tears flowing down both of their faces. She's been wondering, looking for him, right? Looking for him, wondering all these years. And he finally comes home. And as I was watching this movie, I just thought, this is a parable. This is a parable of our spiritual journey. This is a parable of our spiritual lives. Because we have wandered from home. And we may just have this echo, this sentiment, this longing that something's missing. We may just have this sense that there's this need to find my true identity. And we find that in God. We find that when we come home to God. And just like the mom in this movie, God embraces us. God has never forgotten us. God has been out looking for us. And God welcomes us home. This movie is based on a book understandably titled A Long Journey Home. That's the name of the book. A Long Journey Home. We find our true home in God. And so this summer, as we head to home, whether that's down the street for a barbecue or a family reunion or across the ocean to a town where we grew up, know that our longing for home points us to something deeper. It points us to a longing for God's kingdom, a longing for the world as it was meant to be and one day will be, a longing to be with God where we belong. And know that we as a church, we exist so that others can find their home in God. We do not exist for ourselves. We exist for the sake of our community so that the people around us can find their true home in God. Ray Anderson was my favorite professor in seminary. And one day while eating at a restaurant in San Francisco, he went into the men's restroom and found these words written on the bathroom mirror. Judas, come home. All is forgiven. Judas, come home. All is forgiven. This is our message and mission as a church. We exist that others may experience their homecoming. We exist for the sake of our community, that those around us may find their true home with God.